To properly address bullying, how bullying is overlooked as a component of poverty-related issues. On August 12, 2020, Pope Francis gave a sermon about human dignity, stating that while we all work for a cure for a virus that strikes everyone without distinction, faith exhorts us to commit ourselves seriously and act to combat differences in the face of violations of human dignity. Childhood bullying is a detrimental and often chronic issue that is commonly addressed for its emotional and physical impacts. For example, a study by psychologists William E. Copeland, Dieter Wolk, and Adrian Angold showed that victims of bullying were at an increased risk of psychiatric disorders and family hardships, including depression, generalized anxiety disorder, and panic disorder. While addressing these risk factors is important, efforts against bullying fail to consider how multifaceted the impacts of bullying are, as well as how much it goes undetected. Studies show that childhood bullying is associated with future outcomes as it relates to the quality of health and overall well-being of its victims. Through its normality in society and elusive modes of perpetuation, bullying is given little priority relative to its lifelong detriment, and should therefore be properly addressed as a factor of poverty and inequality. Before addressing the reasons childhood bullying requires further attention than it is currently given, I must assess the general impacts on victims in later life. According to psychologists Dieter Wolk, William E. Copeland, Adrian Angold, and E. Jane Castejo, victims of childhood bullying are less likely to receive a college education, let alone graduate high school. Further, economist James Heckman found that educational attainment is often a strong indicator of future income and overall well-being in adulthood. Following this idea, the disparity in future wealth is shown to be greater between victims and non-victims than the disparity in education. In regards to victims, this wealth disparity includes significantly higher rates of job dismissal, failure to pay dues on time, and associated poverty. In addition to wealth, victims of childhood bullying have been posed with greater future health risks, especially in rates of serious illnesses, self-reported poor health, and high cigarette usage. In regards to mortality rates, especially as it relates to dignity and inequality, psychologists Dieter Wolk and Susan Tanya Leray found that bullying can lead to an increased risk of suicide and self-harm at any point in one's life. Bullying may come to an end for many people, but the suffering does not. Before it can be controlled, people must not only understand why bullying is commonly overlooked as a factor of poverty and inequality, but also why it is entitled to greater concern. First off, childhood bullying is a universal issue that can be easily disregarded and therefore difficult to control. While some might associate bullies with low intelligence and deviant behavior, many bullies are in fact strong, highly popular, and have good social and emotional understanding. In other words, many instances of bullying are done in a way that cannot be assessed by immediately harmful, such as physical bullying. Emotional bullying can be done undetected far easier than physical bullying, with a similar impact. Now, when researchers and scholars are trying to measure factors of poverty, they tend to look for obvious trends and disparities, such as those between different socioeconomic classes and ethnic groups. In a study conducted by psychologists Neil Tippett and Dieter Wolk, data gathered from children in schools from different areas showed very slight differences in socioeconomic status as it relates to the number of bullying victims. Low status showed a slight greater correlation with bullying victims, but there is also a high prevalence of victims across statuses, which therefore suggests that associations between socioeconomic status and bullying roles are non-significant. Another study by Tippett and Wolk showed no significant variations between child victims across different ethnicities. As previously cited, there is also statistical significance associated with victims of childhood bullying and future socioeconomic status. Nonetheless, it is easy to pass off bullying as a long-lasting issue when it is not thought of as affecting grown men and women in their adult lives. Before evaluating the proliferation of childhood bullying, I must first introduce the indications of taboo surrounding it. According to research, up to 50% of children neglect to tell their parents about bullying, and between 35% and 60% refuse to tell their teachers in school. Not only does this contribute towards the lack of ability to accurately track and measure childhood bullying, but it also indicates a level of insecurity surrounding the person who receives bullying. Secondly, the greatest factor of continued bullying is the act itself. After all, if nothing is done to challenge bullying head on, then how will the cycle be broken? From a scientific perspective, bullying is considered to be an evolutionary adaptation. In other words, subjugation and other modes of dominance have been used to get ahead of others throughout time. This can be seen within different aspects of modern society, such as in families and schools. For instance, according to research by psychologists Dieter Wolk and Muthana Samara, roughly 16.2% of adolescents have reported bullying by siblings. In fact, more than half of victims are involved in the bullying of others in school. The home of a child is generally inescapable for many, so the daily struggle of sibling abuse may require a way to cope. These children have been subjugated by their siblings and may want to treat someone else the same way as a means of reassuring their self-esteem. Now, it is known that bullying spreads bullying, but it is not commonly known how to properly address bystander intervention. In an interview-based study conducted by psychologists Robert Thornburg, Lena Landgren, and Erica Wyman, students at a middle school expressed that their assessment of whether or not to intervene in bullying depended on their perceived severity of the situation. Furthermore, students often feared that involvement would put them at risk of becoming a victim. Some might suggest that students do not care about the victim. However, like all humans, the students are trying to survive, and it is easier for them to live in passivity in an already stressful environment. As for teacher intervention, there is no reasonable evidence to prove whether or not they are ignoring peer victimization or if it is simply out of sight. Nevertheless, one component holds. As previously mentioned, bullies tend to have a strong conception of the world around them and are not going to bully other students in places where staff is nearby, for it puts them at a risk of exposure. On the other hand, it may be reasonable to suggest that victims can easily take matters into their own hands and tell a teacher or staff member about their situation. However, this may put a victim at great risk. For example, not only may the victim risk angering the bully, but may also risk potential social ostracization from other students. Perhaps others will perceive the victim as weak for not handling the situation on their own. Bullying requires further intervention. Maybe if people began to perceive child sufferers as a minority, especially as it relates to future poverty and dignity, then it will be given adequate prioritization. There is no absolute strategy to mitigate childhood bullying, for it is not that simple. Countless policies and seemingly objective methods have been implemented to solve poverty, yet the issue is still prominent. Instead, efforts are focused on those who are already well off, financially and emotionally. Therefore, before researching for answers, more people must care more about issues of childhood bullying as it relates to poverty and inequality. However, nobody can be justly forced into caring and therefore acting. After all, bullying does not affect everyone, so why not live in apathy? The obligation to support others is often attributed to association. People may not be associated by conflict nor even general relationships, but we are all the same species and all live on the same planet. As a result, we are affected by one another's choices and may therefore benefit from further prioritizing issues outside of our own. Similar to poverty and inequality, the effects of childhood bullying are difficult to escape and will continue to spread under the radar without collective intervention. Perhaps we should first recognize the problems of others within our own.